Welcome to the Iowa Outdoorsman Podcast. Brought to you in part by Dakota Decoy Company.
Okay, we are on again. I'm Brandon Hilton. This is the Iowa Outdoorsman Podcast. With me, as always, co-host Randy Thomas. Hey, Randy.
Hey, Mr. Hilton.
How you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing lovely. More excited
Good.
to meet our guest than you. No offense, but I like meeting new people.
Yeah, it's all about the guests, and today we have a good one. We're going to talk about deer hunting and deer management and a lot of stuff that a lot of Iowans really enjoy. One of the owners of Thunder Ridge Outfitter. Today we have with us Tony Sehman. Welcome to the show, Tony.
How you guys doing today?
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. I think it's a good time to talk about getting ready for deer season because there's a lot of guys out in the field doing stuff, and you've been in kind of the deer game for a long time. So before we get into too much detail about some of the other stuff, tell us a little bit about you, how long you've been in the game, and your outfitter service, and what you guys are doing in Southern Iowa.
We just kind of fell into it. My brother and I were pretty hardcore deer hunters. We kill a few good bucks on our own, and then he was doing trade shows with Cabela's and kind of got talking to Cabela's at the time. And Cabela's, a couple of guys that worked at the trade shows were like, hey, we're going to start this tags application service / guide service. Would you guys be willing to maybe do some stuff for us in Iowa? And we started soft probably in 93, built a website and started really booking a lot of clients in 1998, 2000. Cabela's picked us up. We got to the point where I would say we got big enough we didn't need Cabela's. And now we're just kind of stuck with it. We're here for the long haul. I'm not sure. My brother's a taxidermist, and he's kind of trying to fade himself out of it. But every year I suck him back in when it's time to work. So that's kind of where we're at. Like I say, we've been doing this for probably 20, 25 years. It seems like, and I meet so many people and enjoy it to the point where I don't know that there's anything else for me to do till I'm retired.
So long time in the game.
Yes, definitely. There's days where I think this could be my last year, but I look at my appointment schedule as far as our gun hunts are booked out till 2029, so it doesn't look like I'm going to be stopping anytime soon.
At least till 2029, but
right? If I shut it off today, I could quit at 2029. But
So when you say 2020, are those mostly out-of-state hunters that you're booking, or are you
98% of my clients are out-of-state clients? Yes, we will have a few guys that are just kind of frustrated with public hunting, frustrated with trying to find a place to hunt. And so they'll contact us, and they live in the state, and we can work with those guys too. But yeah, I would say of our clientele, probably 98% are out-of-state guys.
Well, and that's, it looks like going on your website, you mentioned the website, iowadeerhunts.com. You guys are pretty successful. It looks like harvesting really nice mature animals. So let's talk a little bit about that and the management process and kind of, how are you guys able to, get these nice herds of deer with nice big mature bucks and get your clients on them? What's process step number one?
When we first started, we were in the business of making everyone happy. If you got a deer with horns and you were happy, we were happy. And for the first probably 8 years, things went really well. And then, just like a light switch, trophy hunting kind of came around to where it's at today. Everyone wanted to kill a monster buck, and I think that the TV shows kind of pushed that genre to us, where you see certain shows killing giant deer in Iowa, and guys that were living in say New Jersey, New York, they all wanted to kill that giant deer, and they no longer were happy with a 130-inch deer. So we at that point knew we had to do something to protect our younger deer that were going to get to that caliber. So therefore we decided that we would impose penalties, which penalties always sounds bad because some of the guys, and most of my clients understand now, they've gotten the point, but penalties kind of makes it sound like you're being penalized for shooting a deer that you might want to kill. And that's not necessarily the case. The penalty is put in place more for you to take a half a second to an extra second when you say draw your bow back and you look at the deer and you think, is this deer worth being penalized, or should I be holding out for something bigger? And so we kind of have it's a difficult structured penalty structure, but we have 3 different categories of farms. We have a regular farm, a trophy farm, and an elite farm. The regular farm, we have a certain minimum inch. The trophy farm goes up another 10 inches, and then the elite farm goes up another 15 inches. And that's 140, 155, or 150, and 165. And we try to cater those farms to the client that's looking for those deer. We, like on our elite farm, is probably one of our more popular hunts, believe it or not. Those farms are farms that we kind of compromise of 800 to 1,000 acres, one track. We have really good neighbors. We set our genetics and our age group goals a lot higher. We harvest less young deer, or at least we try. And so we try to get a deer to 170 all the way up to 200 inches. Now, do we kill a lot of those? No, because there's not a lot of those out there. The big misconception is they're behind every tree in Iowa. A lot of my clients find out that's not true when they get here. But the structure that we implement into those farms really allows us to kill and harvest, much older deer and arguably, higher scoring deer too.
So when you say the 3 levels, so on that, what was the bottom one, 140, 145?
Yeah, that's we call that a regular farm now. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
We've killed 190-inch deer on regular farms.
Okay.
The deer in Iowa don't have a clue where
that's
the
just
fence
baseline from the bottom, but somebody hunting that farm could obviously, if a 200 deer, there's all kinds of 200-inch deer walked in front of them, they could shoot that.
Yeah, they're everywhere. And what we do with that is we get some clients still that have never killed a 140-inch deer. They're from New Jersey, they may be from Florida, and they're completely 100% happy with killing a deer that size. So we know where to put that client on day one, because that client's already let us know, hey, I don't want to be on the high penalty farm. I want to be on a 140-inch deer farm, because the first 140-inch deer that steps out in front of me, he's done. And so we know, speaking with the client, usually from the first time they call us, they'll let us know what they're looking for. And then I've got some clients that have killed, 200 or 380-inch deer, and they want nothing better than, that, or nothing smaller. So we understand that client too, and that client understands us. That client doesn't really come into the game saying, you better get me a 200-inch deer. They come in knowing that they're probably going to go home empty-handed.
Do both those clients pay the same amount? Same
No.
rate? Well, okay.
No.
So you pay the play for the elite farm. Okay.
That's and it's we don't really structure the price for the simple fact that hey, we're growing bigger deer, we're going to cost more, or we're going to charge more. Those farms cost us more in the end. We supplement a lot harder on those farms. We usually pay more per acre because they're in a little better area. And so we just basically have to kind of justify, leasing a farm that's a lot more expensive and growing bigger deer to the client that's looking for that.
Well, and that really leads me into my next question. So other than the more selective harvest on the 3 farms, how are you managing them differently? You mentioned supplements maybe on your elite farm. But how are you managing them differently to say, okay, we're going to hold, more 140-inch deer over here, but on this one, other than supplements and selective harvest, is there anything else you're doing differently to try to get that better class deer on those elite farms?
We're studying our trail camera pictures a lot harder. On just for instance, on a regular farm, it may be a piece that we have leased that's 80 acres. We've got neighbors all around it, and none are really in contact with us. None of them are like, I'm not going to lie. Being an outfitter, guys don't drive down the road and want to jump out and shake your hand. I mean, we're kind of like, frowned upon. But I do have some neighbors that absolutely love me. They love what I'm doing. They wouldn't rather have anybody else next to them. And it's because I'm keeping them in contact and they're keeping me in contact and we're on the same page. But our 140 regular farms, they're going to be a piece that's, next to other people that are, maybe they shotgun hunt and they push the whole thing out and they shoot. If it's brown, it's down. Mm-hmm. That's a farm that we're going to pretty much be just calling a 140 regular farm, because there's not much we can do to save a 3.5-year-old from jumping the fence and getting harvested. On our trophy / elite farms, we're running a lot more cameras. We're leaving food plots on all the farms, but we're leaving a lot more food on those, trying to hold the deer in tighter and keep them from wandering off. And so we also do a lot more age structuring, kind of, keeping an eye on, doing the corny naming the deer, trying to keep a name for each deer so we can remember what deer that was the year before and try to figure out if that's deer's 4.5-year-old, 5.5, or even a 6.5. We like to harvest our bucks at 5.5 years old. And that's just because we feel like that's when they start to reach their maximum potential. I would love every deer to get to 6.5, but it's really hard for a guy that comes from, the eastern side of the United States or southern side to pass up a 165-inch deer that's 4.5, 5.5 years old. I mean, that's they wait 4 to 5 years alone to draw a tag to come to Iowa. So in all ideology, that deer was born the same time that guy started buying points.
Good point.
So that's a long time for a guy to wait and then be told, you know what, you're not allowed to shoot a 165-inch 4.5-year-old because we want that deer next year to be 180. There's got to be a happy medium, and that's where we try to be.
So, going into kind of that management portion of it, you mentioned studying trail cams a lot more. What kind of tips could you give somebody who's just kind of getting into it? Is there a certain number of trail cams per acre? What's your hotspots? What are you looking for when you're studying these trail cams, and what are you really gathering from them? What would you be able to provide me as, say, a non-deer hunter if I wanted to start managing a property for deer?
The first thing I would tell you over amount of trail cameras is quality, because you're going to want to be able to pull that picture up, take a look at it, and see pretty much what the deer looks like, how many points he has on his rack, any noticeable scarring or I had a deer we called Megatron, and he always had a bullet hole in his ear. And so every year, that's how we knew which deer that was. And of course, the older he got, the bigger his rack got. But there would be times in June when he was just developing his rack, and I wasn't really sure if that was him. So I could zoom in on those trail camera pictures and see that bullet hole in his ear. So I would go with quality over quantity. I think cameras per acre, I like to run, probably at least 2 cameras per 40 acres. If you got the right mineral out and you got the right mineral sites placed, you're going to see a deer visit a mineral site probably every 2 to 6 days. Don't get discouraged if you put a camera out and you get a big old giant 10-pointer the first couple nights and then he disappears for a week, because that means he's just on his rotation. He happened to be there that night, probably hitting some beans, and then the next night he may have gone 200 yards over to the clover field for 2 or 3 nights. So that's kind of what we do for cameras. I run probably 200 cell cameras, which is just, and then
Phone's
at
going off all the time.
$9.99 a camera, that's a pretty good bill to run every month. But it gets me, it keeps me from having to travel. We run farms in 5 counties, so just putting the cameras out alone is 2 weeks for me.
No,
So if
yeah.
you can imagine driving around and checking them and replacing batteries, that's another 2 weeks. If I did that, I'd be running it'd be 3 weeks every month doing cameras. So the cellular phone cameras has really changed the whole game. They're really nice. They're handy. They've gotten a lot less expensive. I can remember we picked up our first cellular cameras probably 10 years ago, and they were expensive, and the cell plans were not cheap, and we probably only had 2 or 3 at that time, and we put those in the farms that we didn't want to drive to ever. But there's with several cameras, Tacticam's really changed the whole entire game. They've brought in the cellular camera that's inexpensive. Most of them are about $100 to $125, and then the price point for unlimited photos is like $10 to $12. So, if you get a couple hundred of those out, your phone goes off all day, but you're not having to do near as much legwork.
Yeah,
Sure.
and the quality makes sense. I mean, not being a deer hunter myself, I've deer hunted, but not a deer hunter. But often I'm like, well, when they don't have the racks, they all look the same to me. But you guys are
Yeah.
watching those deer, looking for marks, and you're identifying them and managing that buck even when it doesn't have anything on its head. And that's a good point. That's good to know.
Yeah, because we had a deer last year that it was kind of funny. And I don't want to say I mess with my Facebook followers, but I do have a tendency to kind of throw something out there that I know the answer to already. And I had a deer that I knew how old it was because I had a picture of it 2 years prior. But this deer, everything you would tell you that this deer was a 3.5-year-old young deer, slim body, not a giant neck. His rack didn't have a lot of mass. He was really tall and wide, but so I just cropped the head and I said, what do you guys think? How old do you think this deer is? And I got pretty much 3.5 to 4.5 was the general consensus. There was nothing higher than that. Well, in the full picture, you can see if you zoom in and you get a full quality HD picture, the deer has white hooves and he's got arthritis in his knees. So he's got 2 big bulges on his knees. So this, and I had this, like I say, I had a picture of this deer, same rack, because he had an undeniable point that comes off the front of his forehead. I had this deer 3 years prior. So at 3 years, he was 3.5. So this deer was 6.5 to 7.5-year-old deer. And so then I posted that picture and people were like, I can't believe that deer's that old, but they'll fool you. They just will. And so it's always better to have and to be able to pull in an HD picture or pull the card and get a better idea of, any, like I said, markings or detail in the rack that maybe would tell you something different the next year.
Yeah, that's interesting because I do bow hunt. I'm not a great bow hunter, but I sit in a tree stand several weeks every fall, and I don't use a lot of trail cameras, a little bit, but I always have to try to, I guess, age them on the hoof. And there's been times, and a lot of times, at least for me, it's like if my heart's pumping and I think I want to kill this deer, I'm probably going to. But there's been a lot of times I'm very distant. Huh?
So this is the guy that shoot your 140s.
Yeah. Well, hey, I got to get to the migration too, so I don't have all day to sit around here. But I think, yeah, like you're saying, getting to know those deer, because then when you see them, then you kind of know what you're up against, and you can, your decision's kind of already made if you've got it on camera. Like if this deer comes out, I know I'm going to harvest it, because I've been really disappointed a few times in my life after I've arrowed a deer and then gotten down to it and just been like, that wasn't exactly what I thought it was. So that's good advice. I like that. More cameras.
And so the other aspect with me, and like I say, I hate to be the bad guy all the time, but now you got to write me a $1,500 check. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it even worse. So that's why we really communicate together. My guys will even send me pictures. My gun hunters are really good at this. They've become very talented. They can take a picture through binoculars and go, "Is this the same deer?" You know, he's out there 200 yards working his way towards a food plot, and they're like, "Is this such and such?" And I'll be like, "Yes, go ahead and harvest him." You know, and they're like, then they feel really comfortable about that. But yeah, we try really hard to go over each farm the first night everybody gets here and say, "Okay, here's your farm," and I'll text them all the pictures of the deer I know that are harvestable deer on those farms. And then I'll put the pictures of the deer that I don't want shot. I will screenshot on my phone and put a big red X through that deer and kind of send those to, so they can, you know, it's hard. It really is. And I'm not that evil guy that where if you make a mistake, I'm not always the penalizer. I have a heart. I've shot just like you. I've shot deer when I've gotten down and I've said, "What the heck was that?" You know, that was just. I remember shooting a deer kind of in the fog one time, and this was back when I don't get to bow hunt hardly at all anymore. But this was back when my son was about 8 and he's 27 now. We were looking for this deer and he was up on the hill and I was down in the bottom and he yelled down, "I found your buck." And I was excited because I'd killed 100 and probably 55, 60-inch deer. So I'm hoofing it up the hill and I said, "How is he?" And he says, "Well, he's not what you think he is." So, I mean, that happens to all of us. If you ever tell somebody that you've judged every deer correctly that you've killed, then I want to sit down and have a conversation with you too, because I just don't think that happens. I think we all get buck fever. I think the rush to judgment really happens a lot. And then I also think, you know, the deer comes back so fast sometimes that all you see is horns and you're like, "That's a big deer." And then, so we try to, I don't think it's near as disappointing as writing the penalty check as the guy when he gets up on the deer and his Iowa giant dream just dissolves in his hands, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's going to look at you and go, "Well, I'm happy with the deer, but this isn't what I come to kill," you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of why we enforce all of that collectively and I want everybody to leave my lodge either happy that they had an excellent hunt or, you know, take horns home that they're proud to take back home. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I've had guys say to me, "Well, I could have shot this at home." And that makes me feel bad because that's not why you spend 4.5, 5.5 years applying, building points to come hunt in Iowa. You know, we've really built our state up to be the grand mecca of deer hunting, and it pretty much is. So you don't want a guy to come from North Carolina and say, "Well, I could have killed a 120-inch deer in North Carolina." That's just not what we're in business for.
What can you tell us about what are you finding most effective for your bait sights on these cameras right now? You mentioned myrtle. I don't know if there's anything else you like to use or what you find best to bring them in on a regular.
We're partnered with a company called Big Time. Big Time makes tons of attractants for summer camera sites. That's probably the best time for us to get as much knowledge of what we have for deer on our properties. So Big Time has a mineral called nitro. It's kind of a cherry flavored mineral that has just tons of different minerals, from calcium to potassium to all the things that help grow deer antlers. And then they've also come out with a powdered form of attractant called Triggered this year, and it comes in all different flavors too. And so what we try to do is build a mineral site every, say, probably 20 to 40 acres on a farm. So if we have 100 acre farm, we're building, you know, 4 mineral sites. If we have a 1,000-acre farm, we may have 10 mineral sites. Now, we won't always have a camera on every mineral site because sometimes I don't think it pays to have a camera on every mineral site. And then we may move cameras too. We may set 4 cameras on 4 mineral sites. If I'm getting a deer on one mineral site and then the other mineral site I'm not getting hardly anything, that's usually because of the summer rotation of crops. You're going to find out that in the summer, at least to my belief, most of the bucks are going to spend their time as close to water and beans as they can, because that's what they're eating. Now, if you have clover in the mix or alfalfa, that's going to help too. But it seems like they spend a little time by the corn, and then but they've got to be eating something else. Now they will bed in the corn, and say you have a bean field just right down the road or whatever, they'll eat in that bean field. But we try to concentrate, and we see this with a lot of our deer. They'll disappear an entire year because of the crop rotation. If we've got 1,000-acre farm and there's maybe only 100 acres of crop and the rest is CRP, and say our crop's corn, they may move off to the beans for the whole summer, and then they'll show back up in the fall.
So if you, speaking of crops and food plots, if you had one food source on your farm, regardless of size of the farm, what would you want it to be?
Soybeans.
Beans?
I argue with guys on Facebook all day long with this, but I will tell you this, and I posted a video on my Facebook. Super Bowl Sunday, right out front of my house, I have 5 acres that I plant every year, and this year it's in corn. Last year it was in soybeans, and there was 103 deer in that field that night. People don't believe you. People are like, oh, whatever. I posted a video. I scanned real slow. I made sure every deer hit the video, That's because there's food left, and our winters are pretty harsh after about the middle of December. Our farmers they're farming fence row to fence row. Not so much in southern Iowa, but I know in central and northern Iowa, as soon as that crop's out, they're disking, they're turning the dirt over, and they're getting ready for spring. So anything you can leave for the deer to get them better through the winter, or to provide nutrients that they need when it's 10 below zero out, is going to help you. A lot of guys are into brassicas, and I don't have a problem with brassicas. I think for a bow hunter, that's probably one of your key food plots to plant, because they're hitting brassicas probably from the time the first frost hits. I can plant a brassica field every year, and by the time those brassicas are 3 to 4 inches tall, they're wiping them out. I just think that's because in some spots that's the only green available. But with a bow hunter, I like brassicas. I like some clovers. I like rye. But if I'm going to gun hunt, and if I'm going to bring guys in to December and January, standing beans are my number one. I just, there's no argument. That's the end game for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense, especially that that really late, brutal winter. A lot of times that's where you see the deer standing. Is that you look out and you see that field, and it's like, that looks extremely brutal to even be out there. And it looks like a bare Arctic wasteland, and they're loving life out there.
Yep. And that's just, that's because and like I say, my house sits about half a mile off the road, clear back in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by 1,000 acres. And you literally can sit in my living room in December or January when it's just brutal, and you'll watch those deer on hillsides not move all day until about 30 minutes before dark, and then they just funnel out like a big caravan straight to those food plots. And I know there's a lot of people, probably people who listen to your podcast, they're not big into food plots. They think it's cheating. They think it's baiting. They think it's not the real way to hunt. And everybody can have their belief. But I will tell you this, I feel a lot better when there's 100 deer in the middle of January to the end of January, even to the beginning of February, that are having enough that I've left to eat, to make it through the next winter.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I followed all the chat rooms and the forums where guys go back and forth, and that's the debate. And I'm a believer in food plots. Most of Iowa is a food plot, really, with the all the ag we have. So if guys are hunting over a picked cornfield, it's just a giant food plot anyway. But yeah, if you're taking the game serious, you might as well be out there doing what you can and planting your food plots, getting your trail cameras. And more guys are doing that. There's no real off season, it seems like, when it comes to deer hunting anymore.
Yeah, you're on. Yeah, I get about January 10th, we're done. January 11th, I shut my phone off. The wife and I sit on the couch, and we don't talk about deer at all. And about March 1st, we start picking up sheds, and then we're going again. And I literally have, I finished planting all my soybeans about 2 weeks ago, and now I'm mowing food plots for fall. I'm going through spraying, pre-spraying, we'll be burning here again probably in about another 2 weeks. And I do take a little time off and go walleye fishing up north. But other than that, it's full go, and then blinds out again. And here we are again. And it always seems like the 10th of January, I look ahead and I'm like, oh, got like 6 or 7 months to do nothing. I'm going to walleye fish every weekend. And I don't. And my boat sits out behind the house, and it just looks at me all sad like.
Get me wet.
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, there's always there's always something.
So we're talking about shed. Is that more just for fun and logging miles, or are you looking for those horns of some of those deer, hoping they got through kind of deal?
Yeah, I got a ton of guys that they eat that stuff up. They can't wait to get here with their four-wheelers, and they run all over everything. I hate it. I really do. I kind of joke and say it's a participation trophy for the guys that didn't kill anything, but it does help us a lot to kind of log what's alive and what made it through the year. There's a lot of deer that, it's funny, there's deer that disappear in October we never see again, and we're 100% sure that deer was killed by a neighbor or died of VHD or something, and we'll find it shed in March and be like, heck, that thing's still alive. And so I would say that's probably the second most important tool that we have to kind of judge age and to judge the bucks per acre, and just to get an idea of what we have left on our farms.
Makes sense.
And we can even show those, we'll set those horns on the tables in the lodge here, supper time, whatever, and guys will be like, what's this deer? And it gives them a little something to touch, feel, and kind of get an idea of what the deer that they're either supposed to shoot or not shoot looks like this year.
Yeah. My shed hunting experiences have usually been like an Easter egg hunt where somebody played a prank on you and didn't actually hide any Easter eggs and just out there walking forever.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It really is. I mean, the funny thing is the food plots make everybody a better shed hunter, because that's probably where I would say there's about 2 or 3 good places to always look for sheds. And I think that most people that get frustrated for looking for sheds don't look in the right places. There's a guy by the name Pat Reeve, and I've known him forever. I mean, gosh, way back when we first started, we were really nobody, and they were putting us on TV, and we didn't even know how to act on TV. I mean, it was like we were a couple Southern boys and cameras rolling in, but Pat's probably one of the better shed hunters I think that I know, and I shed hunted my place probably for a couple, 3 or 4 days, looked all over, and I said, good luck. I said, because you ain't going to find none. And he was gone for about an hour and a half on a four-wheeler and came back with 12 sheds. And so that's when I said, I got to ask some questions, because evidently I don't know what I'm doing. And I didn't. It's real common sense. Deer will lay in the sun when they're cold. They'll lay, arguably, if there's no snow where they're going to lay, that's where they want to lay. And they like soft grass. And they're going to lay closest to food or will eat in the food. So I started looking on south-facing slopes where there was grass and where food was close by. And, boom, start picking up sheds. And it's just like fishing. There's certain times, but if you're a walleye fisherman and you're fishing in 1 to 3 foot of water, casting, baits up in there, you're going to catch all the bass. Probably not going to catch a lot of walleyes unless it's in the dark. But so it's, you have to go where those sheds are going to be dropped.
Do you have one particular one you guys found this year that's got you more excited for fall that you can talk about?
Yeah, a couple. I had a client that, I've got a good relationship with this client, and him and I went back and forth. I kid you not, probably two or three full nights, pictures through the binoculars, and I just could not allow him to shoot this deer. And he wanted to shoot this deer because it had been the biggest deer he's ever killed. But we already had discussed this deer is off limits. And he'd send me a little better picture, and I'd say, "God," and he was doing anything to get me to say yes. It's kind of like the Meatloaf song, Dashboard Lights. And I was like, no, man, no. And so finally, he said, I get it. I'm not going to shoot it. And we found that deer. So I think that deer is just going to be a stud this year. I don't deploy my cameras till I try to deploy my cameras the day after July 4th. Just because most of the intel right now is you can't really tell what horns they're going to have. You just pretty much tell they got bases, they got some G1s and G2s, but you can't distinctive, drops or stickers and stuff like that. So I'll start putting them out the 4th of July weekend, and then within about a month, I'll have probably 60% of the bucks that I know I've got left this year.
And then from there, you'll start taking inventory as
Yep.
to what can be harvested and what's off limits. And
Yep. We know, we, like I say, corny deal, but we name a lot of our deer just because it's easier for our guys to come back and tell us what deer they saw. If they come back and they go, well, I saw this big 8-pointer with a kicker on the left side, and he had a split G2, and no, it's just easier to call that deer Forky or the Funky Buck or something like that. And then he just knows, hey, the Funky Buck just came by me. He's headed east. And I may have a guy 300 yards. His buddy may be in another ladder stand 300 yards away, and I can text him and say, hey, Chuck just saw the Funky Buck. He's headed your way. And so I can get that guy off of his phone because he's probably on Facebook half asleep. So I can get that guy off of his phone and get him in full alert, and say, hey, you need to be paying attention now because, there's a deer has entered the chat room and he's ready to, to work. So that helps us too.
oh, for sure.
I'd say, another tool that helps us is cell phones. We didn't have, and I will tell you this also, I think another tool that saves a lot of deer is a cell phone because my guys get bored and they're either on Facebook or they're playing a game in the tree or something like that, and they'll tell me. I mean, they're not proud. They're going to come back and go, man, I was sitting there and I was screwing around on my phone, and I turned around, there's the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life. And nothing you can do about that. I think the cell phone helps us in regards to my clients can tell me what they're seeing. I can move them if they're not seeing anything. If the weather's rolling in and it's getting bad where they're at, I can go pick them up. But again, it's also a tool where if they're not paying attention, the deer's going to slip through them, and by the time they see them, it's too late.
Yeah, and one thing too about cell phones, at least for me, it can keep me out a little bit longer, and I might miss something by not paying attention. But I've got a shorter attention span. If I don't have something to do or look at, then I might pack it in a little too soon. Whereas if you have a cell phone to play with, it keep you in the stand a little bit longer because you're entertained, not just watching.
We make sure before our guys leave that they got snacks and a cell phone and a battery charger.
Essentials.
Yes, 100%.
Well, what kind of advice can you offer to an out-of-stater wanting to come to Iowa for the first time?
The biggest advice I have is to plan ahead. Buy your points, pick your outfitter or pick your place you want to hunt, and do your research with outfitters. When I first started, there was probably, I can think of about 2 outfitters that we were competing against. Now people ask me, hey, would you hunt with so-and-so? I've never even heard of that outfitter before. It's flooded the game. And I feel bad because outfitters are pretty much they've got a bad reputation, and rightfully so for a lot of them, but wrongfully so for some of them. I guess nothing makes me feel better than when someone gets on a post on Facebook and says, "Hey, do you anybody recommend an outfitter for Iowa?" And then I maybe see 10 people consecutively roll down my name. Now that's unfortunate because that's why we're booked all the time. But it does make me feel good to know that we've been doing it right for as long as we've been doing it. I don't think you can go out there. I kind of check all the time, but I don't think you can go out there and find one bad review about our operation. So my biggest stress is buy a preference point every single year. A lot of my guys will call me and they will say, "Hey, I want to hunt with you next year. I want to come on a bow hunt. What do you got available?" And I'll say, "Well," and I may have bow hunts available because it's a lot harder to draw a bow tag in Iowa, but I will say, "How many points do you have?" And they'll say, "What are points?" So right there, that guy's 4.5 or 4 to 5 years away from even hunting with me. And that's the thing that I think the state of Iowa needs to push a little bit harder, is to let people know what the draw process is like. Because to this day, I still don't know what the draw process is like. I had guys this year that didn't draw with 5 points and guys that drew with 4 points. And to me, that seems unfair, but somehow it happens. So that's the biggest thing is get your points in line, get your plan, get your outfitter picked out early. Don't wait till, I'll get clients that'll just throw their ring in the hat and not even let me know, and then they'll call and say, "Hey, I drew a tag." And sometimes if we have an unfortunate draw, we'll have a spot for them. But most of the time we don't. And so I have to send them to another outfitter, which, really makes me feel bad because that's business I'm sending away. But I've got 2 outfitters that I'll work with, and they work with me, and usually we can keep everybody full and happy. So, but yeah, the planning part's the biggest part.
So, what advice would you have for any in-state guys that wanted to come hunt for you? What would be a good process for them to get a spot with you?
The nice thing about in-state people, and especially the archer people, is they fill usually the voids that I have on a draw. Like this year, I had 30 guys put in for archery tags, but because of COVID, the point creep is starting to get worse. So it used to be you could almost draw a tag with 3 points, you could almost draw a tag with 4 points. 5 was a guarantee. Now this year, 4 was iffy and 5 was iffy. So I can have guys that hunt Iowa, that live in Iowa, that can go to Walmart and buy their tag over the counter, and they can get a hold of me and say, "Hey, do you have a spot in such and such?" And so really unfortunately, they don't have to do much prepping. They just have to fill a void that I have.
Luck out if there's an open spot.
Yep, definitely. And Iowa also has a handicap season, and non-residents, it's tougher to hunt that too. And then we also have our youth season. So I'll do youth hunts, and usually with a youth hunt, if it's the right scenario, sometimes I don't even charge. If I have a coal buck, last year I had a coal buck that for 2 years, he was a 7.5-year-old deer. For 5 years and 6 years, nobody would shoot him. I would not shoot him. And this deer had a left side, probably a 70-inch left side, but on his right side was just nothing but a unicorn, just straight up.
Huh.
And so my farmer finally called me and he said, I just want a deer to kill for my son. I don't care what it is, if it's a doe. And I said, here, I sent him pictures. I said, shoot this deer. I said, he's been out in that field all summer long. So they sat there. First night, did not see him, and then the next night he shot that deer, and that kid was in tears, and that's a good feeling too, because a lot of it's just money, numbers, formalities, and stuff like that. It's just that kid that's the best thing he'd ever done so far.
Oh yeah, got to keep the youth in it.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what it's all about. It really is. It's unfortunate that we're where we're at with, everybody wants a giant buck and nobody wants to shoot a little deer, but we all started from the same spot, really.
You got anything else you want to ask him, Randy?
I was just thinking about how easy it'd be to name that one deer with just one spike on its head. Like, well, that's definitely Merlin's wand.
Did that deer
But
have
now
a
he's
name?
dead. Yeah.
We called him the Freak.
The Freak.
All right.
Yeah, Freak, and you know, I've got a Iowa resident that hunts with me every year, and he has a great place to bow hunt. His place, he's got 180, 190 inch deer all over, but during shotgun season, those deer just kind of move off the farm, and he doesn't really have a great place to kill anything during gun season. So he's hunted with me for the past 6 or 7 years, and you know, he was tempted to kill him last year, or the year before, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. So, you know, it worked out good that the youth, and then he killed a hundred and like I think it was 159 inch 8-pointer. So it worked out for him. It worked out for the youth, and
Yeah,
you know, it just worked out for everybody really.
Yeah.
Is your guys'
Sounds
gun
like
hunts, are those just from stand, or do you have any pushing?
Yeah,
taking place?
we don't do any drives. Everything we do gun hunting wise is just basically, you know, we sit in a ladder stand in the mornings over some timber ridge, and then at night everybody's on a big shooting house with food plots. And a lot of my guys got heaters in the blinds, you know, and they're living the life.
No sense of being uncomfortable if you don't have to be.
No, you got to.
No.
I tell all my guys, and I'm pretty honest with them, I want you guys out at daylight and back at dark. I attribute being an outfitter as adult daycare.
Yeah, I could see that.
It
I can
is.
see that.
You got to make sure they got their gloves before they leave. They got their flashlight. Some of them forget their bows. Some of them forget their releases. Some of them can't find their stands. So, yeah, everybody wants to be an outfitter till it's time to do outfitter stuff.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I can believe it. That's funny. Yeah, and you got to hope they get off the plane with all their stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 3 straight wall cartridge rifles that are sighted in down in my safe just for that simple fact. Yep.
It's happened before.
Yeah, it happens a lot.
What's the
more than
penalty
you
for that?
You get a worse spot.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I appreciate you having on. We've taken a lot of your time here, but it's been good conversation, some good stories, and it sounds like you guys are well, and you have been. I know I followed you for a long time, but it's a lot of good information for guys that, you know, maybe especially guys that are just getting into it, that just need a little more advice on some things to do, and I think it was a very beneficial conversation. I know for me as a very poor bow hunter, and maybe it'll give Randy the itch to get in a tree if the ducks or geese aren't flying at some point in November. But
Maybe 2030.
I appreciate you coming on.